Mocked as an ugly bride, the Omega lifted the veil before the court and the Alpha King couldn't move. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to Alara Hayes. The lanterns hanging across the ceremonial hall flickered in the gentle draft, casting shifting light over polished marble floors and gold-trimmed banners. Alara stood at the far end of the aisle, wrapped in a gown chosen not for beauty but to hide her, layers of fabric that swallowed her frame, and a heavy veil that kept her face unseen. Whispers rolled through the court like an unwelcome breeze, brushing against her skin even through the distance. They had called her ugly before they had ever met her. They mocked because it was easy, because she was an Omega bride chosen by politics, not desire. Her hands trembled inside her sleeves, and the thin air beneath the veil tasted of nerves and dust. Alara focused on breathing slowly, but every inhale carried another echo of laughter. Her mother-in-law-to-be watched her from a sculpted balcony, cold eyes tracing every timid step she made. Somewhere near the center of the hall, Lady Lydia, her stepsister, muttered loud enough for rows of guests to hear, claiming the Alpha King deserved someone presentable. The words stung, but Alara kept walking, soft soles brushing the aisle runner. Across the hall, at the head of the ceremony, Alpha King Alden Thorne waited. She had never seen his expression clearly, not even during their brief introduction days earlier. But tonight, even from afar, she could sense his presence like a shift in the room's gravity, steady and undeniable. He stood tall, formal attire in deep shadow black, a contrast to the ivory glow of the torches. He did not look her way yet, and Alara wondered if he, too, believed the rumors, that she was someone to be pitied, concealed, forgotten. When she reached the final steps leading to the platform, a sudden tug from behind nearly sent her stumbling. Lydia's fingers had brushed her gown, just enough to unbalance her without revealing the culprit. Gasps traveled in waves. Someone snickered. Heat rushed to Alara's cheeks beneath the veil. She steadied herself, refusing to look back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. A quiet voice inside her steadied her spine. You are here. You are standing. Keep going. The hall felt impossibly large as she finally faced the king. Her pulse buzzed at the base of her throat. Alden still wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on some distant point past the ceremony doors, as if everything unfolding were beneath his notice. Maybe it was. Maybe she was. Alara inhaled, then slowly released the breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle evenly across her shoulders. Her heartbeat softened its frantic rhythm. Without waiting for anyone to command her forward, she lifted her chin beneath the veil. Tonight would not belong to their whispers. Tonight, she would at least meet her fate with dignity, even if no one else could see it yet. Alara stood at the final step, the murmurs around her growing softer as a quiet tension spread through the ceremonial hall. The torches lining the marble pillars flickered, as if sensing the uncertainty in her breath. The veil felt heavier than it had moments before, its weight pressing against her cheeks, its fabric carrying whispers she had never asked to wear. A low chime echoed across the hall, signaling the moment when the bride was expected to bow. Alara did not move. Her hands curled gently at her sides, the silk of her gown whispering against her palms as she centered herself. For the first time that evening, she lifted her gaze fully toward the man she was meant to marry. Alpha King Alden stood with regal stillness, yet something in his posture shifted ever so slightly, as though he finally sensed her presence. His eyes lifted from the distant doors and settled on the veiled figure before him. She felt the contact like a warm current spreading across her skin. He watched her more closely than before, not yet understanding why her stillness felt different from fear. Behind her, Lydia let out a soft laugh, a sound meant to slice through Alara's confidence. Another whisper followed, claiming the king would be disappointed when he saw the face beneath the veil. Alara breathed through it. She had spent years allowing others to define her worth, years enduring teasing glances and carefully masked pity. Tonight, she wanted to reclaim something small but real. Her heart gently steadied, its rhythm smoothing like ripples settling on a lake. Alden took a single step toward her, the leather of his boots brushing faintly against the polished floor. The movement captured the hall's attention. Silence fell in layers, soft but absolute, as if the very air paused to watch. Alara could hear her own breath, warm against the veil, barely audible. A royal attendant stepped forward as tradition required, ready to remove the veil for her. The man's hands hovered, waiting for her to lower her head. But Alara straightened instead. Her chin rose with a quiet grace that surprised even her. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the gentle longing to do something for herself, perhaps for the first time since entering this hall. She lifted her hands and brushed her fingertips lightly along the edge of the veil. The court gasped softly, not from shock, but from witnessing the unexpected courage of someone they had underestimated. Alden's eyes followed her movement, his expression unreadable yet undeniably focused. Alara could feel the weight of his attention like a warm spotlight, steady and grounding. She paused again, listening inwardly. Her pulse steadied. The hall held its breath. Even Lydia's whispers died out. Alara did not lift the veil yet, but she held it delicately, the gesture alone enough to shift the energy of the room. It was as if the entire court suddenly realized that this moment belonged to her, not to their expectations. The quiet strength rising within her softened the edges of her nerves, allowing her to stand taller. Alden's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. Though he did not speak, something in his stillness felt newly attentive, almost reverent. For the first time, Alara sensed that he was truly seeing her, not the rumors, not the veil, but the woman beneath it. And in that fragile moment suspended between breath and revelation, the entire court waited, uncertain of what would happen next. Alara held the veil between her fingers, its soft fabric trembling slightly with the subtle rhythm of her breath. The hall, once filled with scattered whispers, now felt unusually still, as though every sound had been pulled into the quiet anticipation surrounding her. It was not silence born from mockery anymore. It was silence drawn from curiosity, from the unexpected shift in her presence that even she could feel. Alden watched her with a focus that was steady and unwavering, his posture no longer distant. Something in his expression had changed, though she could not name it. It was not recognition, not yet, but it was certainly attention sharpened into something almost gentle. The royal attendant who had been waiting earlier lowered his hands with a hesitant glance toward the king, unsure if he should intervene. Alden did not look at him. His gaze remained on Alara, a quiet signal that no one else should move. The small realization gave her strength. Alara let her fingers rest on the edge of the veil a moment longer, feeling the softness of the fabric, feeling her own pulse settle beneath her skin. Her chest rose and fell with a slow inhale, and when she exhaled, a calm warmth spread through her, steadying her balance. Behind her, Lydia shifted with impatience. Alara could sense her irritation like a spark against her back. The court had expected a timid Omega who would bow quickly and wait for instructions. Instead, they were witnessing a woman who seemed to rediscover her own presence with each breath. A gentle draft drifted through the hall, lifting the edge of the veil just slightly, as though anticipating her next move. Alara stepped onto the final platform, bringing herself fully into Alden's line of sight. Her shoes made almost no sound against the marble, but the movement itself felt resounding. She lifted her chin again, meeting his gaze directly through the thin layer of fabric. The veil softened everything, but she could still see the shape of his eyes, the way they held hers without hesitation. Something flickered there, subtle but undeniable. It felt like the moment when a lantern is lit in a quiet room, filling the shadows with warm light. Alara raised her hands once more, slower this time, more deliberate. Her fingertips brushed the fabric gently, lifting it just enough to reveal the faint outline of her lips and the soft line of her jaw. Gasps rose from the guests, not cruel ones, but startled, as though they had been expecting something entirely different. Alara paused, her fingers steady, not from confidence but from a quiet acceptance that had finally settled inside her. She had spent so much of her life shrinking to avoid being noticed. Now, even while hidden beneath a veil, she felt seen for the first time. Alden took another step toward her, closing the distance by only a measure, but the gesture felt significant. It was not commanding. It was not formal. It was simply attentive, a silent acknowledgement that whatever she was about to do mattered. His voice, when it finally broke the stillness, was soft enough for only her to hear. "Do not rush," he said. "Take your time." The words were simple, but they carried a warmth she had never expected from a king known for his restraint. The hall remained breathless around them. Alara held the veil lightly, poised at the threshold of a moment that felt larger than herself, the fabric glowing faintly under the warm lights as she prepared to reveal the truth everyone believed they already knew. Alara felt the warmth of Alden's words settle through her like a steadying hand, quiet but certain, a reassurance she had never expected in a hall filled with so many watching eyes. The veil lay softly between her fingertips, its edge glowing under the golden torchlight, as if urging her forward with a gentle invitation. Her breath moved slowly, each inhale smoothing the tremor in her chest, each exhale easing the weight of the moment. All around them, the court remained frozen in a silence that felt almost delicate. Even Lydia, who had been poised to whisper another cutting remark, stayed still, held by the fragile tension winding through the room. Alara shifted her stance, feeling the faint warmth of the marble beneath her shoes and the intricate pattern of her gown brushing against her ankles as she steadied herself. She lifted the veil a fraction higher, enough to catch a clearer outline of Alden's expression through the thinning layer of fabric. His silver eyes did not waver. They followed her movement with a level of focus that softened the hard edges of his usually reserved presence. Alara did not know him well, did not know if he was cold or kind, but in this moment he appeared unexpectedly human, quietly attentive in a way that eased the tightness in her chest. One of the advisors standing nearby shifted, almost stepping forward as if to hurry the ceremony, but Alden raised a hand slightly without. Looking away from her, the advisor froze. Even the faint rustle of clothing from the guests fell still again. Alara's fingers brushed the center seam of the veil, feeling the gentle texture that had hidden her for so long. She remembered every whispered comment that had trailed behind her since childhood, every time she had tried to become smaller so others would not notice or judge. Tonight, however, she did not want to hide. She wanted to breathe like herself, even if only for this single moment. She let her fingertips run along the fabric again, slower this time, allowing the court to absorb the quiet confidence radiating from her posture. The veil lifted slightly at the movement, and a soft gasp rippled through the hall. It was not unkind. It was surprised, almost reverent, as though they were seeing something they had not prepared themselves for. Alara paused again, not because she feared what they would think, but because she wished to savor the calm blooming gently within her. She had always assumed confidence came from loud declarations or bold gestures, but now she realized it could be something quiet, something that lived in the way she carried her breath. Alden stepped a little closer, leaving only a short space between them. His presence felt warm, steady, and far less imposing than she had imagined. He spoke again, softly, with a tone almost absent of formality. "Only when you are ready," he said. The words settled over her like a soft shawl, comforting without confining. Alara drew a final breath, letting her heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm. She lifted the veil higher, holding it just at the edge of revelation, the room watching with a mix of awe and wonder. In that suspended moment, she felt something shift, not in the hall, but within herself, a sense that what came next would not only reshape how others saw her, but how she would learn to see herself. Alara held the veil just below the point of revealing her face, her fingers steady in a way she had never imagined possible in a hall filled with so many watchful eyes. The golden torchlight warmed the fabric, turning its edges into a soft halo that framed the quiet courage rising within her. The court remained breathless, suspended in a moment that felt stretched thin with anticipation. She could feel the attention of every guest, every advisor, every whisper that had ever dismissed her, gathering behind her like a tide waiting to break. Yet none of that weighed as heavily as the single presence directly before her. Alden stood only a short distance away, his gaze unwavering, his posture neither commanding nor distant. There was something in his eyes that made her pulse slow into a calmer rhythm, something that felt unexpectedly grounding. He did not speak again, did not urge her forward, but the subtle softness in his expression told her she was not standing alone. Alara let her fingers rest on the edge of the veil, feeling the fine weave of the fabric, as familiar as the doubts she had carried for years. Then she drew a breath, slow and steady, and began lifting the veil inch by inch. The hall reacted in murmurs that grew softer as the fabric rose, creating a gentle wave of surprise that rippled through the gathered crowd. The air shifted with it, as though even the room itself leaned in closer. She lifted the veil to the height of her nose, pausing again, not out of fear, but because she wanted to honor the quiet certainty building inside her. For the first time, she did not brace herself for ridicule. She simply breathed. Alden's eyes widened, only slightly, but enough for her to notice through the remaining curtain of fabric. His normally composed expression softened into something almost startled, as though the pieces of a realization were slowly settling into place. Another soft gasp echoed from the rows behind her. Not one person laughed. Even Lydia, who had been poised to deliver another jab, stayed strangely silent, her posture tight with disbelief. Alara lifted the veil a little farther. The fabric cleared her lips entirely, revealing the gentle shape of her mouth, the faint blush across her cheeks, and the quiet strength etched into her expression. Light brushed across her face for the first time that evening, warm and soft. It felt like stepping into the open after years of standing in shadows. Alden took a small breath, subtle but noticeable, as if the sight of her had shifted something in him. His gaze traced her features with a slow recognition that seemed to deepen with every second. He stepped closer, leaving barely a measure of space between them now. The warmth of his presence wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. Alara's heart lifted in her chest, steady and sure. In this suspended moment, she could feel something unspoken passing between them, delicate yet undeniable, as if the air itself recognized a bond forming in the quiet space between their breaths. She held the veil just below her eyes now, the world waiting for the final reveal, and in that fragile pause, she sensed that once the veil fell completely, nothing in this hall would ever be the same again. Alara held the veil just below her eyes, the thin fabric trembling gently between her fingers as the warm torchlight brushed across her cheeks. The hall felt impossibly quiet now, as if every breath had merged into one suspended note. She sensed the weight of the moment pressing softly against her skin, not in a way that overwhelmed her, but in a way that made her feel unexpectedly present. Her heartbeat steadied into a calm rhythm that matched the quiet rise and fall of her breath. Alden stood only inches closer than before, but the shift in distance carried a different kind of gravity. His eyes, clear and steady, held hers through the last veil of fabric. There was no impatience in his gaze, no trace of the hesitation she had always braced herself to expect. Instead, she found a quiet wonder there, as though he were trying to understand something that had appeared before him for the very first time. The court waited, silent and almost reverent. No one dared whisper now, not even Lydia, whose rigid posture hinted at disbelief more than anything else. The advisors, the nobles, the guests who had entered expecting spectacle now found themselves drawn into a moment that felt unexpectedly intimate, as if they were witnessing something sacred rather than a formal ceremony. Alara's fingers brushed the veil again, sliding the fabric just a little higher. The light touched the bridge of her nose, warm and gentle, illuminating the soft curve of her features beneath it. She felt the air against her skin, a delicate coolness that contrasted the warmth blooming quietly in her chest. For a slow heartbeat, she hesitated, not out of fear, but because she felt the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. She had never chosen to be the center of attention, never imagined that removing a veil could shift the entire atmosphere of a room built on power and expectation. Alden's expression softened further, the stern lines around his eyes easing into something almost tender. His voice, quiet enough for only her to hear, drifted toward her like a reassuring breeze. "You are doing just fine," he said. The words settled around her like a gentle embrace. She lifted the veil another inch. Gasps rose again, but softer this time, as if the room exhaled in awe. She saw the faint wonder ripple through the crowd in widening waves. She did not look at them. Her eyes remained on Alden, who watched her as though the world had narrowed to the space between them. She felt a steadiness radiating from him, a warmth that reached her even without touch. It anchored her, softened the edges of uncertainty, and allowed her to move with a grace she never knew she possessed. Alara held the veil poised at the final point, her breath calm, her hands no longer trembling. The moment stretched, delicate and full, like the last quiet second before dawn breaks over the horizon. She drew in a gentle breath, feeling her heart settle firmly in her chest, and prepared to lift the veil completely, unaware that the reveal would change far more than how the court saw her. It would change everything. Alara felt the quiet weight of the moment settle across her shoulders as she held the veil at its final point, the thin fabric trembling softly in her grasp. The hall remained suspended in a hush so complete that she could hear the faint crackle of the torches along the marble walls. Warm light shimmered across the floor, catching the gentle rise and fall of her breath, illuminating the poise she had never imagined she could carry in front of so many watchful eyes. Alden stood only a short distance away, his presence steady and almost grounding. His gaze held hers with a calm intensity that made the air between them feel warmer. She felt no pressure from him, no haste, only a quiet assurance that allowed her to breathe more fully, more freely, as though the very space around her expanded to make room for her courage. With one more slow inhale, Alara lifted the veil the final inch. The fabric floated upward in her hands, and then, with a gentle sweep, she lifted it above her head entirely. A soft gasp rippled through the court, not sharp or cruel, but stunned, like the collective breath of a room that had just seen the sun emerge from behind the clouds. The veil settled over her shoulders, and light touched her face completely for the first time. Her features were soft yet defined, carrying a quiet strength that had gone unnoticed beneath years of whispered judgments. Her eyes, steady and luminous, reflected the warm glow of the torches. She did not look away or lower her gaze. She simply stood as herself, unhidden and unashamed. Alden's reaction was immediate, though subtle. His breath caught, his posture stilling in a way that felt almost reverent. His expression shifted with a quiet astonishment, as though something within him had recognized her before his mind had fully understood why. The change was small but unmistakable, the softening around his eyes, the way his chest rose in a held breath, the way his attention deepened, as if pulled by something instinctive and undeniable. A murmur of disbelief spread across the court. Someone whispered that she did not look anything like the rumors. Someone else whispered that the veil had hidden a face far more gentle and striking than they had ever imagined. Lydia's eyes widened, her confidence faltering, her practiced smirk slipping away as she stared at the sister she had spent years dismissing. Alara did not look back at her. Her attention stayed on Alden, whose gaze held her with an unwavering steadiness that made her heart lift in her chest. He stepped closer with deliberate calm, closing the small distance between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was warm, low, and touched with something she could not quite name. "There you are," he said softly. The simple words carried a depth that spread through the hall in gentle waves. Alara felt the warmth of them settle into her heart. For the first time, she sensed something shift around her, not just in the room, but in the very path her life was taking. And though she did not fully understand what the moment meant yet, she knew with quiet certainty that nothing about this night, or this man, would ever be ordinary again. For a long moment, Alara could only stand where she was, the veil resting across her shoulders and the warm light brushing gently against her newly revealed face. The hall seemed to expand with the silence, as if every breath taken by every person in the room moved in slow motion around her. Alden's words, quietly spoken and filled with an unexpected warmth, lingered in the air between them. "There you are." The simple phrase echoed through her chest, settling deeper than she expected, softening something that had always felt tense inside her. She drew in a slow, steady breath, grounding herself in the weight of this moment. Alden's gaze did not shift away. He stood completely still, yet his presence felt larger now, as though he were trying to absorb every detail of her expression, as though the world beyond this small space had faded into nothing more than a distant hum. The nobles in the hall exchanged glances, their earlier confidence unraveling into uncertainty. Nothing about this moment resembled the spectacle they had anticipated. Instead of seeing a bride cower beneath their judgment, they watched an Omega stand with a quiet strength that seemed to reshape the room itself. Lydia pressed a hand against her chest, stunned into silence. Her eyes darted between Alara and the king, disbelief tightening her features. It was clear she had expected ridicule to follow the reveal, not this soft, dawning admiration that settled over Alden like a warm dawn. Alara did not look toward her stepsister. Her attention remained fixed on the king, whose silver eyes reflected the torchlight with an almost gentle brightness. He took another small step closer, closing the distance until she could feel the faint warmth of his presence brushing lightly against her skin. "You carried that veil as though it was a burden," Alden said softly. "You do not need to carry anything like that again." The words were not loud enough for the entire hall to hear, but their tone carried through the room like a quiet promise. Alara felt her breath catch, not in fear, but in something closer to awe. She had never heard someone speak to her with such calm sincerity, especially not in a room filled with expectations and scrutiny. Her hands fell slowly to her sides, the last tremor fading from her fingertips. She did not need to hide them anymore. Alden extended his hand toward her, palm open, not commanding or insisting, simply offering. The gesture felt almost ceremonial in its simplicity. It was an invitation, not an order. Alara hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because she feared him, but because the gentleness of the moment took her by surprise. Then she placed her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. As their hands met, a soft murmur rose from the crowd, a ripple of surprise that moved through the hall like a shift in the wind. Alden's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes now, a recognition, a certainty, that made her pulse steady rather than race. "Walk with me," he said, his voice quiet yet firm enough to be heard by those closest to them. Alara nodded, her breath easing into a gentle rhythm. As they began to move together across the platform, the hall followed them with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and dawning realization. Whatever they had expected from this ceremony, it was clear now that the story unfolding before them was something none of them had imagined. And as Alara stepped forward beside the king, she felt the first fragile threads of a new beginning weaving gently around her, changing the air, changing her future, changing everything. Alara walked beside Alden, her hand resting lightly in his, the warmth of his touch guiding her across the polished marble platform with a steadiness she had never expected to feel on this night. The hall followed their steps with a hush so complete that even the soft rustle of her gown felt like a note in a larger, quieter melody. Torches flickered overhead, their golden light stretching long shadows across the floor, illuminating the path as though the room itself acknowledged the shift that had taken place. When they reached the center of the ceremonial dais, Alden paused, turning toward her with a calm that softened the commanding lines of his posture. His hand remained steady beneath hers, a silent promise that she was no longer stepping into this future alone. Alara lifted her gaze to meet his, finding not judgment, not expectation, but something far gentler, something almost reverent in the way he looked at her now. The court held its breath behind them, their disbelief simmering in the thick quiet. Alara could feel the weight of their stares, but, for the first time, their presence did not press against her chest. Instead, it felt distant, softened by the space Alden created simply. By standing beside her, Elder Harlan, the officiant of the ceremony, cleared his throat with a startled hesitation. He had prepared for a union marked by cold formality, not this unexpected stillness, not this unexpected warmth. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "shall we proceed?" Alden did not look away from Alara. He spoke with a grounded certainty that carried effortlessly across the hall. "We shall." The words were gentle but firm, reshaping the air around them with their quiet authority. Alara's breath trembled softly, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that this moment, once dreaded, now felt strangely like the start of something she had never dared imagine. Elder Harlan lifted the ceremonial scroll, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. He began to speak the ancient vows, his voice echoing softly through the chamber. But for Alara, the words seemed to fade into a distant hum, overshadowed by the nearness of Alden, by the warmth of his presence, by the grounding calm she felt with every heartbeat. When it came time for the bride to affirm her vows, Harlan nodded to her gently. Alara Hayes, do you stand willingly? She felt the question settle in her, deeper than the hall, deeper than the ceremony. For the first time tonight, she answered with her whole heart. I do. The response was quiet, but its confidence rang clearly across the marble. A soft murmur rippled through the audience, stunned by the strength they had never thought to associate with her. Alden's expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. Something in his gaze warmed further, as though her simple declaration had touched something inside him. Harlan turned to the king. Alden Thorne, do you stand willingly? This time, the answer came without a moment of hesitation. I do, Alden said, and though the words were spoken with royal composure, the faint softness beneath them felt unmistakably personal. The hall absorbed their responses with a quiet reverence, as if the entire kingdom had turned its attention to the fragile thread connecting the two of them. Harlan lifted his hands. Then before the court and the crown, this union is recognized. A gentle wave of warmth spread across Alara's chest, a feeling she had not expected, a feeling that brimmed with possibility. As the hall exhaled in collective awe, Alden leaned closer, his voice just above a whisper, meant only for her. You changed the room. The moment you lifted your veil. Alara felt a quiet brightness bloom within her, soft yet powerful, the kind of light that begins small but promises to grow. And as she stood beside him, newly recognized and newly seen, she knew that whatever came next would no longer be defined by whispers or doubts, but by the quiet strength she had discovered within herself and the unexpected way the Alpha King had already begun to see her.